Pastor Ed here with weekly devotions. I missed last week. I was under the weather. In fact, through the weekend and even last minute wasn't able to make it to church. So what I decided to do was the sermon that I had prepared for Sunday, I'm going to share as the weekly devotion this week. And actually, because of its length, I'm going to split it up, do the first half today, and then come back with the second half in a couple of days. So again, this is for the week of Monday, April the 27th. I'm recording it on April 27th, and so hopefully Josh will be able to share it with you on Tuesday, April 28th, and then on Thursday I'll do part 2. The sermon and now our weekly devotion is based on the reading that was assigned as part of the narrative lectionary from the book of Acts, the 16th chapter, just verses 6 through 10. So I'm going to read that for you and then go into the devotion. Paul and Silas went through the region of Phrygia and Galatia, having been forbidden by the Holy Spirit to speak the word in Asia. And when they had come opposite Mysia, they attempted to go to Bithynia, but the Spirit of Jesus did not allow them. So passing by Mysia, they went on to Troas. And during the night, Paul had a vision, and there stood a man of Macedonia, pleading with him and saying, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." And when he had seen the vision, we immediately tried to cross over to Macedonia, being convinced that God had called us to proclaim the good news to them. The title of my sermon, now my devotion, is The Importance of Vision. Now, let me start by saying all of you may not be football fans. Even so, you may have been aware that Thursday, Friday, and Saturday of this past weekend was the NFL football draft. And so I thought, in honor of that, response to that, I would have sort of a football story, but it's not really a football story. You'll see what I mean. It's about a fellow by the name of Chan Gailey. And most of you probably don't recognize that name. He's a retired football coach. In fact, during his nearly 50-year career, he had been the head coach of both the Dallas Cowboys and the Buffalo Bills in the NFL, as well as Georgia Tech in the collegiate ranks, in addition to holding a number of assistant coaching positions in both college and the pros. But back in the early 80s, he was the head football coach of Troy State University down in Alabama, a Division II school, which is not exactly the big time, if you know what I mean. Well, nevertheless, in 1984, he actually guided the Trojans to a Division II national championship game against North Dakota State, a game that they ultimately won 18-17, thus claiming the top spot in the entire country in that division. But the week before that big game, however, he was headed out to the practice field when a secretary called him back to take a phone call. Well, preoccupied, somewhat irritated, Gailey told her just take a message because he was busy. Big game coming up, right? And she responded, "But it's Sports Illustrated." And for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, Sports Illustrated has long been the preeminent sports magazine in the country. So quickly turning around, he answered, "I'll be right there." And as he made his way back to the building, he began to think about the possibility of an upcoming article in Sports Illustrated. It'd be great publicity, he thought, for a small school like Troy State, not to mention what it might mean to his own career. In fact, he had this wonderful vision of what an article in Sports Illustrated might lead to for both the school and, again, also for himself. Well, as he got closer, he began to think that perhaps the typical 3-page article might not be sufficient to tell the entire story. So coming even closer to the building, he even started fantasizing about that he might be featured even on the cover. Should I pose or go with an action shot, he wondered to himself. Well, needless to say, his head was spinning with all these possibilities. Well, when he arrived back at the office, he immediately picked up the phone and said hello, and the person at the other end of the line asked, "Is this Chan Gailey?" He answered proudly, "Yes, it is." "Well, sir, this is Sports Illustrated," the voice on the other end said. "And we're calling to tell you that your subscription is running out. Are you interested in renewing it?" Coach Gailey, you see, had all these wonderful dreams and visions dancing around his head, didn't he? But then reality set in and his dreams and visions came crashing down. The problem, of course, was that his visions were visions of glory, having an article and a picture on the cover. In other words, they were self-centered visions, and reality has an uncanny way of canceling those self-centered visions, don't they? Humbling us in the process as well. Well, clearly, Chan Gailey did not have a realistic or even appropriate vision, one might argue, but that doesn't mean that vision doesn't matter, because it does. Vision is important, critically important even, but it has to be the correct vision. And in the case of the church, it has to be a God-given vision. Well, in that reading from Acts that I shared with you moments ago, we heard how the Apostle Paul, the former Saul, and also the former persecutor of the church, who we met last week on Sunday in the reading, and his companions were looking to share the gospel in the region of Phrygia and Galatia. They apparently had a vision. It was their own vision of where they hoped to go to spread the good news of Jesus Christ. But the Holy Spirit prevented them from having any success in Asia, we're told, which is kind of weird since this was their second missionary journey, and they had intentionally decided to retrace the steps of their first missionary journey, revisiting every town where they had preached the word previously, only this time without much success, it seems. Well, next they attempted to go to Bithynia, but the Spirit did not allow them to have any success there either, as we heard. But during the night, Paul had this vision, a new vision. He saw a man pleading with him, saying, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." And so they set sail from Troas, crossing over to Samothrace, and the following day they went to Neapolis, and ultimately arriving in Philippi, the leading city of the region of Macedonia. And not only that, but here they finally had success, in particular with a woman named Lydia, who was introduced in the verses following the reading I shared with you today. A woman who eagerly opened her heart to what Paul was saying, and soon afterwards, in fact, both she and her entire household were baptized, and she even prevailed upon them to come and stay in her home for a bit. Success at last. But this time it was God's vision, wasn't it? Not Paul's. But what is vision? According to Simon Sinek, vision is the ability to see that which does not yet exist, that which cannot be seen. Cannot be seen yet, I might add. The best illustration of this is something that occurred during the opening of Walt Disney World back in 1974. For those of you who don't know or remember, Walt Disney had died several years earlier, before the theme park that bore his name was ever completed. And at that grand opening in 1974, Mrs. Disney was sitting next to Walter Cronkite, the beloved TV anchorman who was on CBS back in the day. And Cronkite, trying hard to say the right thing to Disney's widow on this special occasion, leaned over and he whispered, "Wouldn't it be great if Walt was here to see this today?" To which Mrs. Disney wisely responded, "If Walt had not seen this first, you would not be seeing it today." Vision. Donnie Cranberry once wrote, "When God gives us a vision, something inside us begins to change. It consumes our thoughts, every move we make." And he adds, vision points you in a direction. Vision gives you an opportunity to become more than you already are. Vision means that you're not living life merely for yourself. Vision has a self-fulfilling destiny when it's connected with God. Vision will wake you up in the middle of the night calling out to you. And finally, you will not be able to get away from a vision because it will pursue you. And that's exactly what happened to Paul in today's reading, isn't it? The vision of the man from Macedonia woke him up in the middle of the night calling out to him. And Paul was unable to get away from the vision, but instead he immediately set sail for Macedonia and to where God was leading him. A fellow by the name of Bob Logan writes, "Vision is the capacity to create a compelling picture of the desired state of affairs that inspires people to respond. A godly vision," he says, "is right for the times, right for the church, and right for the people. A godly vision," he says, "promotes faith rather than fear. A godly vision motivates people to action. A godly vision requires risk-taking. And finally, a godly vision glorifies God, not people." George Barna adds, "Vision is the ability to understand the history, the present condition, and the potential of the church, and to conceive a plan for action that will maximize the ministry potential. Visions always entail progress," he says. "It's never satisfied with the status quo." And Rick Warren gave perhaps the simplest definition of all when he wrote, "Vision is the ability to see the opportunities within your current circumstances. Or again, as cynic stated, vision is the ability to see that which does not yet exist. And as such, then, vision is a glimpse of the future, at least a possible future. And that's because there are no guarantees. It's not a foregone conclusion that even if we see those possibilities, even if we have a vision, that we'll actually go ahead and pursue it. Sometimes, of course, we simply lack vision, but sometimes, perhaps many times, our vision is simply too small, too narrow, and too safe. Several years ago, Tom Schultz, the founder of Group Publishing that produces a lot of Sunday school and VBS curriculum, wrote a piece entitled "The Church's Frightful Kodak Moment." Many of you probably remember, as I do, the Eastman Kodak Company, commonly known to the vast majority of us as simply Kodak, which was undoubtedly best known for producing the film that most of us used in our cameras. As a matter of fact, throughout most of the 20th century, Kodak held the dominant position in that industry. So great was their dominance that by 1976, Kodak had an 89% market share of all the photographic film sales in the United States. Almost everyone used the brand, writes Schultz. And even the company's famous tagline, Kodak Moment, soon came to describe and to symbolize for most of us those special moments in life that we all wanted to record on film for posterity. Schultz, however, described walking through the nearly empty but once flourishing Kodak manufacturing plant near his home. The plant manager, a friend from church, sadly related to him how all the Kodak plants, once so dominant and productive, had been downsizing and closing ever since the advent of digital photography. "We have a wish here," said the friend. We just want to be the last one standing. Unfortunately, not long after that little tour with his friend, the plant manager, Kodak went ahead and abandoned most of its space on that particular campus, and then not long afterwards announced the latest and final round of job cuts, including the elimination of his friend's job. "My friend from church is gone," says Schultz. And I wonder, he asks, is the church the next to go the way of Kodak? "I see some chilling parallels," he writes. And Schultz then goes on to describe what he calls a colossal story of failure and missed opportunities. You see, in the case of Kodak, that once dominated the photographic film business with an 89% market share, they were a casualty in the end, and as mentioned earlier, due to the digital photography revolution. After all, no one uses film anymore. But here's the kicker, the supreme but sad irony. Digital photography, as it turns out, was a technology that Kodak itself had invented. You heard me right. Digital photography, the innovation that ultimately toppled Kodak from its perch high atop the entire photography industry, was a Kodak creation. In fact, it was a Kodak engineer, Steve Sasson, who invented the very first digital camera back in 1975, or just about a year before the company had reached that 89% market share milestone. Asked later about this colossal blunder, Sasson replied, "But it was filmless photography." And so management's reaction was, "That's cute, but don't tell anybody about it." In other words, back in 1975, Kodak had a narrow and limited vision, didn't they? And a choice between seizing a golden opportunity themselves and thereby introducing this innovative new way of taking pictures, not to mention simultaneously solidifying their preeminent position atop the entire photographic industry, or taking a pass on this exciting new technology and running the risk of having their competitors catch up, overtake, ultimately perhaps even surpass them. Or to put it more bluntly, they were given a choice between life and death, between success and failure, between innovation and a reluctance, if not an outright refusal, to change. In other words, between their old vision and a brand new one. And they made the wrong choice, didn't they? Their vision had become outdated, and in the end, it failed them. You see, by the 1990s, Kodak had begun to struggle financially, both as a result of the decline in photographic film sales and their slowness to embrace and transition into digital photography as well. Sadly, they never did catch up. The last year that they showed a profit was 2007. By January 2012, Kodak had filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection, and on September the 3rd, 2013, they finally reemerged from that bankruptcy, largely divested of most of their former businesses, not to mention as merely a shell of their former self. Now, it's certainly a shame that this had to happen to this once proud and successful company. It would still be tragic even if Kodak were to turn out to be the only company in history ever to make such a colossally poor choice. But it turns out that they aren't. And so vision is so critically important. That's what we're talking about here. And is the vision adequate or inadequate? Does it become too old, and in a sense keeps a company, or individual, whatever, a group, from embracing that which is new? Well, I'm going to continue this devotion on Thursday, but this will get you started, and we'll pick up where I left off here today in a couple of days. Till then, take care. Bye.